Chapter 1. Early notices of Ceylon in classical writers: Arrian, Dionysius the geographer, Ovid, Ptolemy, Pliny, Diodorus Siculus. Cinnamon not mentioned by these and other ancient authors as the production of Ceylon. The commercial importance of Ceylon in the 6th century, described by Cosma Indica Plustus. Ceylon, visited by Marco Polo in the 13th, by Sir John Mandeville in the 14th century. The first information respecting the island of Ceylon or Taprobane, as it is usually denominated in ancient writers, was brought into Europe by Nearchus and Onesicritus, who were commanders of the fleet which Alexander dispatched from the Indus to the Persian Gulf. Gibbon remarks that the early geographers and even Ptolemy were so imperfectly acquainted with this remote region that they magnified above 15 times the real size of this new world, which they extended as far as the equator and the neighborhood of China. Dionysius, the geographer, mentions Taprobane as famed for its breed of elephants. Matera taprobone, Asiatic elephantine, mother taprobane of Asian elephants. Ovid has the following mention of Taprobane as a part of the world removed almost beyond the limits of human intercourse, to which he asks of what advantage it could be for his fame to reach. Quid tibi si calida prosit lauder sign, art ubi Taprobanen indica singit aqua. What good does it do you even if you are praised by hot Seine or where Indian water encircles Taprobane? In the time of Ptolemy, the island was called Saliki in Greek and the inhabitants Salai. Hence, we discern the origin of the modern name of Ceylon or Ceylon. The Arabians add to this name a termination signifying island, Celandive or Celandib. Another Pliny says that Taprobane was long supposed to be another continent, alterum orbem terrarum, that is, another world, and that it was not clearly known to be an island till the age of Alexander. He tells us that Onesicritus had celebrated its elephants above those of India on account of their greater bulk and their more warlike properties, and that Eratosthenes had extolled the purity of its gold and the size of its pearls. Those who make this voyage, says Pliny, cannot conduct their course by the observation of the stars, for the North Pole is no longer visible to the eye. But the mariners, according to an ancient practice, carried birds in the vessel, which they set at liberty at intervals in order to mark the direction they pursued to the land. An accidental occurrence in the reign of the Emperor Claudius contributed to make the Romans more acquainted with the island of Ceylon and to increase their intercourse with that part of the world. One Annius Plocamus, a freedman who farmed the customs in the Red Sea, having been blown in a violent tempest off the coast of Arabia, was unexpectedly driven after passage of 15 days to the port of Hippuros in the island of Taprobane. Here he was kindly received by the king of the country, whose hospitality he experienced during a period of 6 months. In this interval, this European visitant had ample leisure to make the Ceylonese monarch fully acquainted with the majesty of Rome. He accordingly dispatched an embassy consisting of 4 persons to the imperial city. These ambassadors from Ceylon gave, in some measure, an erroneous account of the island, or one that was rendered erroneous by the mistakes of Roman interpreters. They said that their country contained 500 towns, that in Palasimundo, which is represented as the capital, the palace alone could boast 2 lakh inhabitants, that they had commercial dealings with the Ceres by some supposed Chinese, whom they described as men of gigantic size with red hair, blue eyes, a shrill and piercing voice, and a language which they did not understand. They represented their traffic with the Ceres to be conducted in much the same manner as the ancient commercial intercourse between the Phoenicians and the Britons, in which each party deposited in a certain place the goods which they designed to exchange, and which one relinquished to the other when a satisfactory equivalent had been reciprocally obtained. But, says Pliny, though Taprobane is so far removed from the Roman world, still it is not free from the vices of Rome. Gold and silver are their objects of cupidity. They have variegated marble, jewels, and pearls, which are of great beauty and in high esteem. The ambassadors from Ceylon represented their wealth to be greater than that of the Romans, but said that the Romans turned theirs to more use. They mentioned that no one among them had any slaves. They did not take any repose after sunrise or during the day. Their houses were of moderate height. Provisions were never at an extravagant price, and they were free from the evils of judicial strife. For a king, they chose from amongst the people one who was venerable for his years and his humanity, and who was without a family. But if he should happen to have children, they compelled him to resign the sovereignty, lest the kingdom should become hereditary. The sovereign had a council of 30 persons assigned him by the people, and no one could be condemned to death except by a plurality of their suffrages. But the person thus condemned had a power of appeal from their sentence to the people, who in that case appointed 70 other judges to try the cause. And if they acquitted the accused, the former 30 by whom he had been condemned were immediately disgraced and never afterwards held in any estimation. If the king committed any outrage against his duty as a sovereign, he was condemned to suffer not by the hand of violence, but by the universal detestation which he experienced. Every individual avoided his company, and he was left to perish in silence and in solitude. Their festivals were devoted to the chase, and they delighted most in that of the tiger and the elephant. Their fields were in a high state of cultivation. They had no grapes but abundance of apples, and it was not uncommon for them to attain the age of 100 years. If that part of the above account which relates to the political state of Ceylon be not entirely fabulous, it proves that the government of that island was formerly more free than it is at present or has long been. But the statement of Pliny shows a great degree of civil liberty, a greater regard for popular rights, and principles more adverse to the abuse of sovereign power than perhaps ever existed in any of the regions of the East. In the account of this island, which is found in Diodorus Siculus, Lib 2, there seems nearly an equal mixture of fable and of truth. He describes the inhabitants as characterized by an extraordinary longevity and as little subject to disease. He says that they have a severe law according to which they put to death those who are mutilated or labor under corporeal deformity. But what is more remarkable, he adds, that they had a law to limit the duration of life, and that those who had attained this period took their leave of existence by a voluntary but uncommon death. The country produced a plant on which he who fell asleep expired without a struggle or a sigh. The same historian relates that the inhabitants of this island had a community of wives, that they regarded their children as a common stock without any of the feeling of parental preference, and that the children were interchanged in their infancy so that even mothers could not recognize their own. The climate, though under the equinoctial line, is mentioned as the temperate, that the inhabitants are molested neither by the heat nor by the cold, and their fruits are said to ripen during the whole year. Thus, says the author, according to the poet, here clustering grapes and luscious figs appear, with pears and apples, through the smiling year. It is not a little remarkable that in the ancient accounts of Ceylon, cinnamon, for which it is at present so celebrated, is never mentioned among its valuable products. Strabo speaks of Taprobane as supplying the Indian markets with large quantities of ivory, tortoise shell, and other commodities. But cinnamon is not enumerated amongst the rest. though it could hardly have been omitted if the country, which he mentions under the name of Taprobane, were the same as the modern Ceylon, and if that island were, in his time, as famed for the growth of that species of aromatic as it has since been. When the accurate geographer mentions Taprobane with a little more particularity in another place, he speaks of its breed of elephants but says nothing of its cinnamon. A very acute historian asks whether cinnamon, instead of being the aboriginal growth of Ceylon, were not subsequently naturalized in that island as cloves were in Amboina. In the 6th century, Ceylon had become the chief seat of the commerce of the Indian Ocean. Vessels entered its ports from the most remote parts of the East, and the merchants of Ceylon, in their turn, were not deficient in commercial enterprise. From China, called Tsinitza, they received silk, aloes, cloves, the wood of cloves, sandalwood, and other articles. And from Malay, that is Malabar, they imported pepper from Caliana, now a place of great trade, copper, wood of sesame, like ebony, and a variety of stuffs. And from Sindhu, musk, castoreum, and spikenard. All these articles, together with some spiceries and the hyacinths for which the island was famous, were exported to every shore of the Indian Ocean. The Persian traders to Ceylon, that is Ceylon, appear to have been very numerous since there was a church erected for them, the clergy of which received ordination in Persia. A principal part of their cargoes consisted of Persian horses for the use of the king. These commercial particulars may be found in the account of Cosmas in Decoplustros, which, as Dr. Robertson remarks, is the last which the nations of the West received from any person who had visited that country till the 13th century, when the avidity of commerce began to awaken the spirit of curiosity, and the human mind, after the torpor of ages, was gradually roused into renovated activity. In the later part of the 13th century, Ceylon was visited by Marco Polo, a Venetian, on his return to Europe from his long and celebrated travels. Marco Polo has justly been styled the Columbus of the East, as he was the first European who ever saw, or at least made known, the sea beyond China. He left Venice in his way to Asia at the end of 1271 or the beginning of the following year, and he did not return till 1295. He passed the greater part of this long period at the court of Kublai, the great Khan of Tartary, on the frontiers of China. His father and uncle had previously spent many years in the dominions of the same sovereign, and on their return they took with them young Marco, who was then about 19 years of age. Marco soon acquired the confidence of the Khan and was employed by him on several missions of great importance to the most distant provinces of his mighty empire. Marco diligently availed himself of these favorable opportunities to become acquainted with the productions and manners of the countries through which he passed. And though he was formerly accused of exaggeration and fiction, yet subsequent research and the observation of later travelers have confirmed the general accuracy of his narrative. Tiraboschi, with his usual candor, has vindicated his character and paid a just tribute of praise to his veracity. Dr. Robertson, speaking of Marco Polo, says he describes the great kingdom of Cathay, the name by which China is still known in many parts of the East, and traveled through it from Chimbalu or Peking on its northern frontier to some of its most southern provinces. He visited different parts of Hindustan and is the first who mentions Bengal and Gujarat by their present names as great and opulent kingdoms. Besides what he discovered on his journeys by land, he made more than one voyage in the Indian Ocean and acquired some information concerning an island which he calls Zipangri or Zipango, probably Japan. He visited in person Java, Sumatra, and several islands contiguous to them, the island of Ceylon and the coast of Malabar as far as the Gulf of Cambay, to all which he gives the names that they now bear. This was the most extensive survey hitherto made of the East and the most complete description of it ever given by any European. and in an age which had hardly any knowledge of those regions, but what was derived from the geography of Ptolemy, not only the Venetians, but all the people of Europe were astonished at the discovery of immense countries open to their view, beyond what had hitherto been reputed the utmost boundary of the earth in that quarter. Marco Polo says of Ceylon that it is the finest island in the world. The king is called Sendarnaz. The men and women are idolaters, go naked, save that they cover their loins with a cloth, have no corn but rice, and oil of sesamino, milk, flesh, wine of trees, abundance of brasil, the best rubies in the world, sapphires and amethysts, and other gems. The king is said to have the very finest ruby that was ever seen, as long as one's hand and as big as a man's arm, without spot, shining like a fire, and not to be bought for money. Kublai Khan sent for and offered the value of a city for it, but the king answered he would not give it for the treasure of the world, nor part with it because it was his ancestors. The men are unfit for soldiers and hire others when they have occasion. About half a century after Marco Polo, Ceylon was visited by Sir John Mandeville, who was a native of St. Albans in this country. His work was first published in quarto in 1588 under the title of The Voyage and Travail of Sir John Mandeville, Knight, which treateth of the way to Jerusalem and marvels of Inde, and etc. A more complete edition appeared in 1727 in Octave. The author appears to have been better informed than preceding travelers respecting the dimensions of the island, the circumference of which he states at 800 miles, which is not far from the truth. He mentions that it contained a large portion of wilderness and was infested by serpents, crocodiles, and wild beasts. He does not omit to notice its gigantic progeny of elephants, nor does he forget the celebrated mountain where Adam and Eve, after they were driven out of paradise, wept for 100 years till they filled a lake with the effusions of their remorse. He adds that the king was appointed by election and that the island had 2 summers, 2 winters, and 2 harvests in a year. Next is chapter 2. We'll go to that in next video.